Welcome back to Face the Nation. The midterm elections are less than a month away, so we'd like to welcome CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto to share some new insights from our Battleground Tracker Polling. All right, Anthony, let's start with the top big insight. What's going to happen to the House?
Well, at the moment, we've got the House with the Democrats getting over the 218 seats that they would need to take it if the election were today. Right now, we've got them at 226 seats in our model. That number has been creeping up slowly over the course of the summer, as long as we've been doing these battleground trackers. But it is still very heavily dependent on at least two things for the Democrats. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's dependent on turnout among people who don't typically vote in midterms, and it's dependent on a few meaningful crossover voters coming from having voted for Donald Trump to voting Democrat now.
Okay, so just to remind people, you're not saying that it is chiseled in stone that Democrats will take the House. You're saying right now, as trends go forward, it looks like the Democrats have a shot. Run me through those two scenarios and how they play out.
Yeah, what we did with this was, because we want to emphasize for people that we're defining a range of possibilities here, especially still weeks out, we actually took the model and we reran it with these scenarios. One, how many seats could the Democrats conceivably get if everything breaks their way? If all of these folks really do show up, if all of these groups that they're dependent on, these younger voters, these women voters, all do stay the way they are in the polling.
And the first group you're talking about are people who don't usually vote in midterm elections.
That's right.
This is the scenario actually they do this time.
Actually, they do. They make good on what they're telling us, on what most of them are telling us in the polling. Now, if we put that in the model, it goes as high as 235 seats, so they get a little bump from that. However, let's suppose they don't show up, and that's a reasonable assumption because they haven't done this before, and frankly, sometimes people do over-report this turnout propensity in the polling, right? So if they don't show up, these are folks who maybe they voted in a presidential, but they didn't typically vote in the last midterms in 2010 and 2014. If they don't show up, then the Democrats don't make it. They don't get the 218 that they need, and the Republicans hold the House. So if they don't get that, and the Democrats don't get quite as many of those crossover voters come back home a little bit to the Republican Party, then the reps still have a chance to hold it.
These people you're talking about are the ones who would like to tell a pollster they're going to vote. They feel it's their civic duty, but election day comes around, they're busy, they got a couple of jobs, whatever, they're not making it. So these are the people who are the key to what you've identified, which is maybe that's the key to whether the Democrats take the House or not.
Yeah, and they mean it when they say it now. Yeah. But right, life sometimes gets in the way.
You also measure this question of enthusiasm, but you have a more subtle crack at it. What did you find about enthusiasm?
Well, enthusiasm is one of those factors that's mixed into what you just described. People who really mean to vote, but maybe something gets in the way. Maybe enthusiasm helps you get over that hurdle. But really, I want to say that enthusiasm is not the same thing as voting. What you want to look at is that intent to vote. Look, you can only push that lever so hard. You can push it enthusiastically, or you can just kind of give it a click. It's still one vote. But what you want to look at is whether that enthusiasm then drives people across that finish line, actually gets them there.
So your point is people can get more enthusiastic, so they're snapping the lever off when they pull it, but it doesn't mean that an additional person is going to vote necessarily. Is there a way enthusiasm splits by party?
Yeah, the Republicans have become more enthusiastic over the last couple of weeks. That's important for them, right? They want to get that base turnout, and we think that helps move that. But at the same time, the vote intention of both parties is up, and it is even. It is even between Democrats and Republicans saying that they're showing up.
So they're going to show up at the polls. Both parties are saying as much. Does that represent a change more for the Republicans or the Democrats recently?
Well, the enthusiasm is up, but the Democrats and Republicans are equally up on intention of turning out.
Now, let's go to the groups within the polling. What are you learning and seeing about women and men and the so-called gender gap?
Right. Well, the gender gap is up, and that means there's an increasing difference between how women are voting, in this case more heavily for the Democrats, and how men are voting, in this case more heavily for the Republicans. So we looked at why this is, and one of the reasons is that women are among this group that are heavily cross-pressured this year. They say that they think the economy is doing well. Normally, that would advantage the party in power, the Republicans. they voted in these districts. They voted for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in about even measures. But this year they also say that they're unsatisfied with the direction of the country, and they're breaking Democratic for that reason. They also tell us that they feel like the Republican Party works against the interests of women and more for the interests of men. So on a personal level, as a group identifier, a group affiliation, you see them breaking more heavily Democratic right now.
What did we, if anything, learn about what the hearings of Justice Kavanaugh did to affect either women, men, enthusiasm? There were a lot of claims made. What does the data show?
It inserted a lot of anger. We see anger up on both sides. We see Republicans saying they're increasingly angry about the prospect of the Democrats winning, Democrats saying they're increasingly angry about the prospect of the Republicans winning. Now, anger does also correlate with intention to turn out. When you feel more passionate about something, you're more likely to go and do it. So that's one determinant of turnout for certain. Did it change anybody's mind, though? No. It does not appear like it changed anybody's mind. It appeared to just cement what people already thought going in.
Now, we know that the news cycle changes, multiple times a day. What is your expectation? Do you have anything in the data that tells us anything about whether that anger stays and sticks and takes people all the way to Election Day? Or is it an acute, momentary thing happening now?
Well, one factor you want to watch is the president. We are on pace now for the president to be a factor in people's voting at really what would be historic levels. So typically, a majority, maybe a slight majority of people who vote in midterms say that the president's a factor in their vote, either for or against. But this year, we've got many more voters saying that they feel like the president is a factor, either for or against. In fact, it's relatively split. But there's no question that he is on the ballot, so to speak, or at least in the minds of voters when they're going to the polls this year.
He says he wants it to be a referendum on him, and it turns out the voters are seeing it, though.
Very mumuch so. Like I said, at historic levels at this point.
All right. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. We'll be seeing a lot of you in the next 20 days. Thanks.
Indeed. Thanks, John.